Good evening. I would like to welcome everyone to the town of Lexington.
Around somewhere.
Would you like? Excuse me. I will start over thanks to my two council members running their mouths. I would like to welcome everyone to the town of Lexington. This is a special call council meeting specifically regarding the fiscal year 2026 budget. Yes, I got that right. I'm Hazel Livingston, the mayor for the town of Lexington. I would like to introduce my fellow council members. To my left is Mayor Pro Tem Ron Williams.
Good evening.
To his left is Councilmember Todd Lyle.
Good evening.
To his left is Councilmember Jenny Michaels. To my right is Councilmember Todd Carnes.
Good evening.
To his right is Councilmember Gavin Smith.
Good evening.
And to his right is Councilmember Will Allen.
Good evening.
I will now call this meeting to order. We met in executive session prior to this meeting where we discussed the following matters: discussion regarding West Columbia water litigation and discussion regarding agenda items. No vote was taken. Do I hear a motion to ratify this report?
So moved.
Mayor Pro Tem makes the motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Councilman Lyle seconds it. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor raise your right hand, and it is unanimous. Now we will move into tonight's business item, the 2026 proposed budget on enterprise funds, and we will start with Town Administrator Rachel Glayton.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm going to turn the mic over to Assistant Town Administrator Stuart Ford. In between him and our Finance Director and our Utilities Director, they'll present for you all tonight.
Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Look forward to our discussion tonight. And I want to, first of all, thank the Finance Department and all of the department directors. David is here in particular for all of their work to get us to this point tonight. And no sense wasting any time any further. We'll dive directly into our presentation, starting with Kathy, who will give you an overview. As she normally does, I will talk to you a little bit more about one of the larger line items in our budget. David's going to give you a brief update on what's happening in the Utilities Department, and then Kathy will come back out to discuss further the positions in the Finance Department. So thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll go ahead and get started. So this is the budget for the Enterprise Fund for fiscal year 26. Okay, do I point it at you? I did. It says it's on. I don't know. Technically challenged. I was gonna say, if it works for you after I did all that, I was gonna be upset.
No, it's a me. It's a Monday.
There we go. So the first one shows enterprise revenue. As the system has grown, our revenues have grown. I will tell you that the other income, the yellow item, includes service fees, late fees, and miscellaneous income. So you got sewer, water, capital contribution fees, the other interest and tap fees. For 26, we have budgeted $21 million for sewer and $8 million for water. That's the largest part of our funding sources. We are budgeting $9 million of cash reserves, and that mostly covers our capital projects, which is expected. Our next slide shows you how our expenditures have grown over the years. Overall, between 25 and 26, it's like 11.69% increase in expenditures. A lot of that is just your inflation. And then, of course, The Casey sewer costs have gone way up, and I think that's one of the things that Stuart's going to talk to you about, so I won't go into that. The next slide talks about our fund expenses for the year. A large portion is our salaries and wages, that's $8 million plus. Contractual services is 8.8, which that includes the water and the sewer service costs. And then our capital improvement plan is $13 million. Then you've got other operating expenses, debt service, and capital equipment. The next slide talks about our debt service coverage ratios. We're required to keep it above 1.2. So you can see we're doing fairly well with that. The spike in 2021, we had a lot of capital contribution fees that year. We collected a lot, so that increased our coverage ratio. The next year, it wasn't quite as much. It was a couple $1 million difference between capital contribution fees for those 2 years. And then in '24, we did have some extra capital contribution fees, but we also had a lot of vacant positions, so our expenses were down. And so that's where that stands. Then the next slide is our positions that we've had over the years. So as the system have grown, we've had to add people. And I think we've done a fairly good job of keeping that as low as possible. So that's my stuff. Oh.
Mayor and council, we mentioned last year that the city of Casey was going through a process of doing a rate study and that we saw some impacts in their budget. And we have had ongoing conversations with the city. I wanted to, about what is driving these costs, but I want to kind of give you the picture of what we're talking about and why it's a significant issue. So with the city of Casey, if you look at their sewer budget overall for operations and maintenance, you see from 2019 to 2024, those budget items went up on average $409,000. And then in 2025, the budget increase year over year from 2024 was just over $2 million. It's a 23% increase in the single year. So that's a pretty significant jump. They ended up raising their water and sewer rates about 25% last year. So the corresponding increase in water rates, we also see a cost increase in the budget. Now, you all know that we have a contract with the city of Casey that sets by formula how our costs are determined. And it's not based upon the rates and charges they charge to their customers. It begins first and foremost with the operating budget. And then those costs certain costs are allocated to the Joint Water and Sewer Commission in the town of Lexington, things that are related specifically to providing sewer service to us. So we're calling those the contract cost with the city of Casey. And when we pay for our bill, we're paying based upon that formula. So it's not 100% driven by the budget, but the budget is a major portion of the cost. The other portion that we have to take into consideration is the strength of the flow that has to be treated at the sewer plant. And that was an important consideration for the city back when we negotiated the contract. The stronger the flow, how much BOD, TSS, and ammonia that's in the sewer, it drives the cost of treatment at the plant. And so our costs are based upon how much of those constituent parts are in our sewer to the plant. So first of all, if you look at the budget, we've seen the increases, but I think it's important to note that the city has been under budget each year, so about 5%. So it's not like this one-year spike was because they were having budget shortfalls previously. So there's something that needs to be shown to us that's different in 2025. And of course, 2026, they, like us, are in the budget process, so we don't know exactly yet what the budget will be for 2026 from the city and how it will impact us. We'll find out May 1st. If you look at just the costs that are related to what are called the purchasers, the Joint Water and Sewer Commission and the town of Lexington, you see how much those contract costs, which is a subset of the budget, have gone up, and by what percentage since 2019. And what you notice there is one spike in 22, but relatively consistent. On average, that's gone up $356,000 a year, and on average, the percentage increase has been about 7% through 2024. 2025 follows a pattern that's similar to the whole budget. It's up 22%, $1.47 million more than the prior year. That is 4 times the prior 6-year average increase. So if you look at just the town of Lexington, of those contract costs, what portion are we paying? Well, you see, these are the contract O&M costs that were allocated to the town of Lexington over the past 7 years by budget. These, you can see that it goes down slightly. That's mainly because the strength of our flow declined, and then you've seen increases each year since 2022. The thing that's important to see is that eye-popping number at the top. In 1 year, we had almost a 30% increase in the budgeted cost to the town of Lexington for the sewer from the city. Now, last year when we talked about this, I told you all that we could absorb this in the budget. One of the reasons we can is because of something you'll hear about tonight, vacant positions in our utilities department. That is money that's not going out the door. It's instead being spent for sewer contract costs. If last year we had come to you and said, look, we really need to go up on our sewer rates to match what Casey's proposing to charge, we would have had to ask for an additional 4.1% above the 3.5% increase that had been adopted previously. In 2026, if you're looking at our budget, that number is about 8.7%. We'd have to go up 8.7% more on top of the 3.5% for the sewer side, just to keep up with the cost from the city of Casey. So without an increase beyond the 3.5, what will naturally happen is our coverage ratios will decline because our costs are going up that aren't being offset by revenue, and our cash flow will decline. Now, we're not coming to you tonight asking for an additional budget adjustment. Number one, we don't know 100% what will be the result of the City of Casey's budgeting process. It's usually been fairly predictable, as you've seen from the history, but last year and this year it's unpredictable. However, with the positions that remain vacant, and we anticipate at least for some portion of next year we'll have vacant positions in the utilities department, unfortunately, but those will help to offset these increases in sewer cost. We wanted to give you this overview of this issue because even though we're absorbing it now, It will impact what we're planning to receive down the road once we get to full staffing, and when we have to do, in the out years, capital projects and pay debt service. Covering the cost of sewer is going to be an important factor when we go into the next rate study. And so I wanted you all to at least see the magnitude of what we're talking about so that it's not a surprise down the road. Now, hopefully, maybe the Casey's budget will moderate. Maybe there won't be significant changes this year. But this is what we are planning on through 2026. So that's the overview I wanted to give to you of that important line item. David's going to come and talk about the department. He's going to address the issues of vacant positions and how that impacts the department, what we've been able to accomplish, and then we're going to come back and talk to you a little more about our proposal to you for certain positions in the finance department in particular. Thank you all.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. All right, as Stuart said, I'm going to give you an update. So last year we came to you, we asked to significantly reorganize the department. So I wanted to give you an update on the steps we've taken and some of the outcome of doing that. So we reorganized to address the hiring difficulties, staff retention, and position accountability. So the field staff positions were renamed from maintenance techs to water and wastewater utility techs so that when we were advertising, we could get people hopefully with experience. They'd understand what those positions were and would apply. We decided instead of having just water and just sewer, that we would have some utility techs that were trained on both sides. That way it would give us flexibility. If we had emergencies, if we had 13 water emergencies, we could reallocate resources to that as opposed to running out of knowledgeable people. We added some steps so that they could be promoted so that we could, that was one of the things we heard, that there was no ability to grow within the organization, so we restructured to provide some growth. We adjusted pay grades. We've implemented a fine-tuned interview and reference check system to try and identify character as much for culture as well as just technical expertise. And we rolled out some utilities departmental expectations so that everybody knows what's expected of them in this department. So when I arrived, the vacancy rate was 45%, and we were able, through doing these things, cut it down to 24% this past year. So we still have a quarter of our positions vacant, but we made significant strides. Takes a lot of time. I kid the chief. He was complaining about sending his new people, having to send them out to get them trained, and they'd go to an academy. And I said, I wish I had an academy, because it takes us about 3 years before we have someone off the street with no experience that can be a valuable asset that we can send out by themselves. So some of the additional steps that we've taken during this fiscal year. We began rolling out a comprehensive training program. That's super important. As I just said, it's hard to get them up to speed, so we have to be focused in what we're going to do to take a new person off the street and get them up to speed as quickly as possible. We purchased a work order and inventory software solution. We're in the process of rolling that out, so that'll allow us to be more organized and efficient. We're working on an internship program with Lexington One School District, so hopefully that will help target folks coming out with a natural affinity for working with their hands and being outside that will find they like working with us, and hopefully even if it's just, one per year, that's somebody that can grow with. And we also worked with SC Works Midlands to develop a Hydro Careers initiative meant to connect utilities throughout the Midlands with folks looking for that. And because I was one of the people working, as you see from the small box, Lexington is one of the first ones you see when you click on their link. Employee tenure. So some items of note here, if you look at that, that's currently where we're sitting, and 35% of our utility tech positions have 1 year or less of experience. So that's of note, besides looking at how many, you can see how many have less than 5. And usually in the industry, we'll draw if you have less than 5, you're still learning. You're considered an apprentice. So we have 35% of our techs that have a year or less. That's a huge amount. So 26% of the utility department staff can retire at any time. You're not going to necessarily see that in that chart, although some will. That's employee tenure, but we have some folks that worked elsewhere before they came here, and they are close to retiring. So that's also a significant thing as we look at building up the positions behind the ones that are going out the door, trying to combat that brain drain. So, departures. We always look at departures as people are leaving. Sometimes you're not too sad to see them go, and sometimes you're very sad to see them go. And we had about 54% of the people that were leaving that told us they were leaving for a better opportunity. And I never fault an employee who feels they're bettering themselves or their family, and sometimes I'll even support that. But we have to understand that so that we can do what we can do to stop the merry-go-round, if you will, and build a sustainable, steady organization. So some of the reasons you see there, the negative impact on the family. We had one person who we thought was an up-and-coming star, and he left to go take, I think it was a 25-cent or 50-cent raise to work at Lowe's. And we were like, that's not really a good long-term. Once you get certified and you move up through these positions, you're going to be making a lot more than Lowe's. He goes, yes, but when I go home, I'll be playing ball with my kid in the backyard, and I'm not going to be responding to a water or wastewater emergency. And that's kind of the reality of that situation. The pressure of having to get certifications in CDL is a big thing. And that one, I'm just going to plant the seed on that one because I'm still not convinced whether we are actually where we need to be with salaries. But we're not going to worry about that this year. This year we're still getting organized. We want to see where we land once we're up and running a little bit more efficiently. The job is harder than they thought, so there's a lot of younger kids that are coming out and they're like, man, digging these holes out in the sun, I thought I could handle it. I don't like that too much, and they head off into the sunset. I like this graph a lot because sitting there, if you look at statistics and you talk about, hey, we did a great job, we went from 45 to 24, it is hard to tell what went into actually doing that. But if you look at the red on this graph, you'll see that red is going down. That's vacancies, fiscal year-end vacancies. If you look at the blue, That's hiring. So in the fiscal year and 3 quarters that we are right now, it took us, if I remember correctly, 28 hires in 2 years to drop that vacancy rate from 45 to 24%. 28 hires. That does not include going through the applications. It does not include the 80 interviews that we did in that time, or attempted interviews, because a lot of people won't show up. We've had a lot of people wash out on pre-employment checks. We've had some of our better ones turn us down because we weren't negotiating salary. So there's a lot of things that go into a lot of work to make that progress. So that one just kind of shows you there, when you see those blue lines, that's a lot of people coming in to offset the green, which is your departures. So the good news is you see the departures going down too, and I think as you build a department that's built on culture, that's how it should be, because hopefully we get to a point where we level out and we've got people who love it here as much as we do and they want to be here. So let's see, task presented. Some of the other good news for this year. So we did make progress. Even though we were working, we were able to, last year, meter maintenance is something that had not been done. It had fallen by. We just didn't have the people to do it, so it wasn't getting done. That was a big thing. So when I got here and I met with other departments, finance was one of the first ones, because that's one of the most important things. We have to be in lockstep. And that was identified as an issue where falling behind on maintenance was actually having a really negative impact on our billing cycle. So that was one of the first things we focused on, and that's a win. If you go to finance now, they'll be like, hey, the effort we put in there showed big dividends. Electrical testing and inspection of MCCs, pumps, all of that. When I first went out in the system, I was kind of scared at some of the things I saw out there, and that was a focus. We were able to bring in an electrical instrumentation supervisor who is a huge asset to us. And we also supplemented that with some outside work, and so that was one of the things we were able to address this fiscal year. Lift station standards and audit system was rolled out. This is based on regulatory expectations. So when the regulators come out and do an inspection, if we're doing that, we're going to be in good shape. Now it was just rolled out, so we've got a little bit of work to do before we're up to standards. We also had 2 employees that have been promoted already, and 5 are on the cusp of being promoted. So the system we put in place, those that want to utilize it are utilizing it. Still some bad news. So there's a lot of work out there that we should be doing that we're not doing. And I listed it out there for you. I gave you some of the assets that we have out there that are behind those numbers. These are assets that are growing all the time. So when we talk about growth, on the one hand, we talk about revenue that comes with that. We talk about our capital contributions, but the other side of that is there's also work associated with that. So every time we have valves put in the ground, we have to add that to our valve maintenance program, and we have to have somebody who goes out and turns those valves annually. So what you see here is the list of work that we're still not getting to. It equates to almost 26,000 man-hours of work that's not being completed. So I just talked about that. The utilities department is still predominantly reactive, and those bullet points kind of tell you why that's bad. I think most of you understand that, so I'm going to skip over that to shorten my spiel here and get to some of the good news. At this time last year, you were hearing stats where we had almost 31,000 man-hours of work not being completed, and that has dropped down to 26,000. So it sounds like a small drop in the bucket, but we are going in the right direction. And when it comes to vacancies, I know one of the things that seems, if you're sitting back, sometimes you can say, hey, if we haven't been using these positions, then maybe we can use those positions to offset. And while that's helping us when they are vacant, it's not something we want to do in long terms in terms of operating properly. And for the sake of just a position, I guess, we have, if we filled all of our spots right now, we would have just under 13,000 usable man-hours to put towards those tasks that we just talked about. So there's still a shortfall. We're not talking about filling that shortfall yet. I told Stuart I wouldn't recommend something like that until I know that we're doing everything efficiently and we have a team that we have built up and is trained, and I know they're out there working as efficiently as possible. Then we'll review how we're doing and where the man-hours sit. But I wanted you to have those two numbers there as you look over the budget. I will say that when Kathy talks about the positions for finance, there's going to be an additional 2,000, almost 3,000 man-hours that will be moving to finance with that we can then put against some of those other tasks. So that's equivalent to 2 full-time employees, just for the sake of understanding. All right, so once fully staffed and trained, I talked about that. I think as we get everybody trained up and efficient, and I'm hitting the word training a lot because that's a super important thing, and when you go through the budget line item, you're going to see that training line item, spoiler alert, is higher than the rest, has jumped up a little bit. And that is a commitment to doing things. So historically, we had a commitment to safety training in place, and that was it. We did not have a commitment to employee growth. So we need certification. So, for example, it's state law that you have to have a distribution license to operate any part of your distribution system. Yet, we weren't providing classes to our folks to go get distribution certifications. So I've beefed it up to allow for that. One of the other things as we look, I told you we were rolling out a work order and asset management system. We're at the size now, utility-wise, we qualify as a large utility, where we're going to need a planner asset coordinator. I'm looking at that. I think I may be able to, at least in the short term, do it with the positions we have. But we're going to need somebody who's looking at all of those pump assets, for example. And when we purchase them, somebody's looking at that and going, okay, when's this warranty run out? So if we're replacing this pump, is it still under warranty, or do we need to pay for it out of pocket? Right now, we have thousands of assets, and I can guarantee you that nobody really understands what's still under warranty, what's not. We end up fighting with them. We don't have a nice schedule where we can take all of our pumps throughout the system, for example, and if they have a 5-year life, divide them up equally, so we're replacing every 5 years a fifth of our system, so we don't see budget impacts that are swerving and peaking and valleying. So that's coming. Other than there, I gave you some numbers there on our growth. So I went back 5 years. That's our total customer growth for water and sewer. Impressive. And then it gave you the percentage breakdown for in-town, out-of-town for both water, sewer, so that you could see that. And during that time, we averaged totally across the entire utility 14% customer growth over those 5 years. Personnel-wise, during that time, we added 2%. So that's just to keep in mind as you're looking things over. So some of the support that's still to come that we desperately need, system management and planning. So the big thing here is a water model, a dynamic water model, and a dynamic wastewater model. Those are some rough costs that we got to build one and then implement it, and then to have a firm that would manage that. So these would be things, for example, we had a water quality issue in part of our town, and we had to go to joint municipal and ask them to open an interconnect. If we have a model, we understand right off the bat, we can do it through the model. How's this going to impact our entire system? And you're not finding out when you're doing that. You can model that and say, okay, hey, if we make these changes with these valves, it'll mitigate some of those pressure influxes. If you have a developer that comes and says, hey, I want to build here, we can simulate that in a model, and it'll say, you know what? That's not going to work unless we upsize that 6-inch to an 8-inch line. So there's lots of value that would be brought for that. I envision the firm being able to highlight necessary system capital upgrades, so that might be associated with a development, or that could be long-term. Hey, as things are going, we're updating this model as we go, and we may have a capital plan at that point that is not being caught off guard. We have a capital plan now that was, built on a model 5 years ago, and then it was never updated. So are we on track for that? Maybe. Maybe we're not. So that's one of those things that for me is a little bit scary. Like Stuart, I like to plan out. And I feel much better if we have something that's keeping up with the growth as it happens. Maybe it didn't happen over here, it happened over here. That doesn't matter fiscally, but it definitely matters to your system and which stations become overloaded. We have stations out there that every time it rains, I have to send people out to manually turn on and off to get them to work together. If you have a dynamic wastewater model, that doesn't happen, because you don't let that development get away with an undersized station that can't pump into a force main. So that's just an example of that. They'd also provide operational guidance, planning. We would be able to use them for smaller engineering projects, where maybe it's just doing a design that we could self-perform, for example. And I believe that's it for my spot. So.
Before Kathy comes up, I'll mention on those, the modeling, we're going to look for some possible grant opportunities that David was mentioning to try to get something contributed towards this cost. May not be possible, but that's what we would like to do, and we'll bring that back to you once we explore those options.
Okay. So finance is asking for 2 new meter positions. We were planning on adding 1 just because of the workload and the growth of the system. But then after talking with David and coming up with a plan for some of the things that would be better suited to be in finance versus in utilities. So one of the big things would be to assist with the AMI system. There's a lot of computer work that needs to be done. We want to have all the reading done in a timely manner. Right now, with the current situation, the reads could be, your bill could be 20 days or it could be 40 days. We want to keep that a consistent 30 days for the customer. To help investigate and correct AMI failures, our meter techs are out there at the meters every month, so they know when things are not working properly, and they can more readily address the system instead of having to come back to the office and say, well, tell somebody in utilities to go fix this meter so we can read it, instead of having to go back and do a manual read. It would help us cover for vacations and illness. A lot of times now, if something happens to one of our meter techs, we have to call utilities and say, hey, we need help reading meters because we got to get it in the system. We got to bill our customers. And then one of the things that is in the works is for finance to take over maintenance of all the 3/4 inch meters. So that would mean that 90% of the meters would be maintained in finance, and that directly affects billing and revenues, and uncompleted maintenance equals lost revenue. So for those of you that don't know, we read meters besides just the town of Lexington meters. We have radio read meters where we drive by on a truck. We have the AMI meters that we're supposed to be able to just pull down from the cloud. It works, I think we're at 90%, 97% read accuracy now, and that's thanks to a lot of work that's been done by utilities with the computer readouts and everything. They've really worked hard at getting that percentage up, and we want to keep it there. The joint municipal, we read about 5,800 of their meters. They use an iTron system, and we have that software, so we're able to read it through the iTron. Gilbert Summit, we read about 1,300 of their meters on the Neptune system. Batesburg, Leesville, we got 231 meters out there that we read, and that's a manual read. West Columbia, that's in the Whiteford area. They've got census, but we can't use it, so we have to do manual reads over there. That's 1,100 meters. And then Blue Granite is manual reads. And they're growing, and that's going to be a lot more manual reads for them. And then things that the meter techs do that you may not realize is they have to investigate vacant houses, especially if a vacant house comes up with a reading. We have to figure out, did somebody move in? Do we need to contact them, get them to come in and make application? A lot of times if we've got sewer service at a property and their water service is with somebody else, they don't realize they need to make application with us, so we have to contact them and let them know, hey, we've got your sewer, you need to apply with us. If there is zero consumption on the reports, we need to investigate those to see if people have moved out, to see if there's people there getting water for free, if there's a meter broken. Abnormal consumption, that's something we do. A lot of times it helps the customer because we can tell them, hey, you might have a leak, you might have something going on, we need to investigate and find out why. If the meter's not reading properly, whether it's a drive-by or an AMI, we have to investigate that. Sometimes we have to locate meters, and then we have to look at the hydrant meters. A lot of construction projects, if the builder needs water, they'll hook up to a hydrant and we'll put a meter on it. So we have to read those as well and investigate those. Sometimes those go missing. Then there's water cutoff, lockout, and tagging. That's something that finance will be doing more of. Utilities have helped us with that a lot. So there's a lot of things that the meter techs do that is besides just reading meters. And that's why we're asking for those positions. Okay.
Mayor and Council, thank you for allowing us this time to present to you. We think it's important that we communicate these vital pieces of information as best we can. I think it's noteworthy on the meter techs. When I came in 2001 as finance director, we had 2 meter techs, and we had about 5,000 bills we were sending out to customers. Right now we have 2 meter techs, and we send out about 25,000 bills a month. And not all of those are read manually, but a number are. But it's those folks who go out and collect the data And we need to maintain the AMI system. We've proven over the last few months that dedicated employees working hard can bring the success rate of reading up to the 97, 98% level versus 92 or 90%. Big difference. And we want to see that continue. And those folks being dedicated to, new folks being dedicated to maintaining the meters will provide new resources for utilities, free up resources for utilities, very important. Those two meter techs in 2001, if it weren't for technology, we began our first radio read system in 2003. It was about $750,000 we invested in radio read back then. And we have, a modern system now that collects a lot of data for us, but we have to maintain it. You have to maintain the technology. And so that's why you have that proposal before you as part of this budget request. Now, we want to respond to your questions and try to answer anything that you have, and we'll take our direction from you.
So now we'll open it up for questions, and if y'all will, let's listen to each other's questions so we're not repeating the same ones. And everybody, let me know when you're ready to start. I know, Todd, you've got a list.
Yeah, Madam Mayor. See, Stuart got one. I wanted to know how many meter techs we had. As far as these other meter reads that we do for these other entities, I'm assuming we're compensated for that. Can somebody explain that to me, what our agreement is with these other 6 or 7 entities?
I'm sorry, we have the water service, the sewer service, and they have water meters, so we provide sewer service to those customers. So we're reading for us. We're not reading for them.
Okay. All right. And hold on, Kathy. Where are we at? I know recently in the last year, Joint Municipal went to fully online applications for new service. I don't think we're there. Where are we at in that process, or are we? Are we fully online for new service applications?
The applications can be downloaded and emailed. We do allow that. I don't know exactly.
So this past year, we implemented the convenience fee charge, the 3% charge. Mm-hmm. That process was more extensive than we initially thought, but it has gotten into place. One of the things that we all talked about last year was evaluating what other steps can we do to make things more efficient, and being able to apply online and have that process automated is one. The other was how to handle paper billing versus electronic billing. And so those things are things that we will take up in the next fiscal year and to make progress on.
Okay. I think that was it in that realm. Maybe for David, I'll just go. Maybe Dave, if you could come up there. Kind of having to go backwards. I'm curious, and I do want to start off by saying I think you've done a yeoman's job of filling positions and trying to stay ahead of the curve and getting us in a better position. But I know there's a lot of heavy lifting to do. Do we do all of our hiring in-house, or do we subcontract any of that out, since it's such a pretty significant part?
No, we do it in-house. Honestly, I'm not sure I would trust going outside. I don't think they would have same goal necessarily. As I kind of hinted at before, I'm not really about filling positions to fill positions. I'm about filling positions to build a team and a culture. And sometimes you can have people that look qualified on paper, but they work against you in the shop. And it's a net loss.
So do we have one dedicated person that's focused on filling open positions?
It's the supervisory team. We go through the interview process together. We have a set of questions that we ask every employee. We do a pre-test before the interview process. If it's a 50-50, if you can't tell from the application whether they're going to be good or not, then I'll send out an email with a couple of short questions in it just to see if they respond on time, if they what their answers are to those tests. So it's kind of a rolled out. I will say this as well. It's written down in the notes, but I didn't touch on it. We had to pause our hiring because our experienced people were tapped out, and we didn't have enough room to train the new ones. So we had to put it on pause.
Okay. And I'm curious, the significant number of people that we had move on to quote unquote better opportunities, like who are we competing with? I know Lowe's is kind of a one-off deal, but who are we competing with that actually has a career path? I'm just curious.
It's been other entities have taken some of ours, other blue collar type, maybe like a brewery, Firestone, places like that. Anywhere that needs a mechanical inclination you're up against.
And then the models that you mentioned where, and I do want to say, like, for everybody listening, I talked to a municipality not long ago that runs they run their own water and sewer, and they don't have a map of where it's at. So we have some stuff to do, but some people don't even know where their stuff is, and we're trying to do a dynamic engineering model to know where the pressures are and how to manipulate it. So I do think we're ahead of the curve, but
I would say partially ahead of the curve. Map-wise, we're way ahead of the curve.
Yeah. Yeah.
Model-wise, a lot of them have modeling, but that model is going to be with their engineer, and it's not available. So when I talk to my peers, most of them are surprised that we don't have one in terms of dynamic models.
Yeah, and so what's the timeline and the process for that? Because it seems like that's something that it's done with an outside consulting engineer, but it's also dynamic. Something has to be maintained.
Correct.
So you have a long-term relationship. So what's the actual process for maintaining that in-house?
It wouldn't be maintained in-house. We don't have the personnel to do that. So it would probably take a good part of a year to build. We would have to do number one, if I have to step back, we'd have to do a request for qualifications. We'd have to put out what we were looking for, select some firms to come in, interview them, see who has that expertise, who's up for, select somebody, and then move forward with the building. Part of that then would have that management piece to go along with it so that they would actually want that work going forward. The idea, and we'll have to see whether firms would be interested in this, is that it would be an objective firm. So this would be a firm that would not be getting huge, million-dollar projects with us. It would be a firm that would be looking at those projects to make sure it was in our best interest and that it fit within our vision and goal going forward.
So, but is that just kind of like the modeling software that we have for traffic signalization? Is it one software that's kind of uniform across the industry that multiple people tap into, everybody uses?
I think there's a couple versions, but essentially, yes, okay. That is correct. And then it's a matter of just keeping it updated. So, I don't know, maybe quarterly you're going to take your new data and you're going to feed it to them and they're going to update it. If we have a major new development that comes online, of course, you're going to build that piece of it into it. So you would keep going in that sort of a realm.
And last question, and then I'll shut up. It's multiple, you guys can get this, but again, in our budget this year, it shows us budgeting $9 million of cash on hand for capital projects, and that is That's indeed, we indeed have that cash on hand. We're just having a big capital project year. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, we have big capital project years a lot, but we do have that money on hand.
Okay, and just round figures, 9 million, it's a big number. How much cash on hand do we have in our capital improvement fund for, we say we're spending 9 million this year's out of cash on hand. Is that 20% of what we have, 50% of what we have? What?
It's probably about 30%, I would think.
Right.
We've got
30%.
about 27 million
Okay.
at June 30th. We collect, capital contribution fees, and we set those aside and keep those until we have big projects.
Okay.
So we would be able to minimize borrowing.
Yeah, I just wanted some sense of scope.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that too, to put it in context, one of the things we have to do that's on our plate, we have to sit down and put together projects to replace all of our lead lines and galvanized required for replacement. We have one project that's going to go out for bid, hopefully in a month or two. And I'm kind of scared at how much that's going to cost us, but that's just one project. And then after that, we have to sit back and put together projects that capture all the other lines that aren't in existing projects. So there's a few things that we're going to be required to do that aren't on our plan yet. So.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a few questions about Casey, but maybe we can handle that separately. Maybe everybody could talk about our internal utility stuff, and then we could go to the Casey question.
And I appreciate you, Todd, asking all those questions, because I know you marked some off mine and off Ron's list already. So Gavin, see if you mark any off our list too.
Todd, thank you, Madam Mayor. So Councilmember Carnes sort of touched on one of the questions. When I was reading through it, so 9.19 million from capital cash on hand to balance the plan is the way that I interpreted it. And I think I've said this in every meeting that we've talked about numbers. I'm not an accountant, so correct me if I get it wrong. But to me, that signified a significant reliance on the reserves. Now, it sounds like we set those aside for this very purpose, but my questions were, as we look ahead, what is the long-term strategy for replenishing those, and are we anticipating continued drawdowns of that fund in future years, or do we have some sort of plan to, again, replenish that fund? What is that plan?
So capital contribution fees are important because new development puts money into the system so that we can pay for projects that serve the community and these in our system. We also plan for when we're going to borrow funds for large projects. We try to put that off as long as we can. So the plan is we build the projects when they're needed. We collect the capital contribution fees as development occurs. We don't spend those for keeping the lights on, so to speak. Those are for capital projects. And as with the general fund that we've talked about, you have a fund balance. We want to maintain a minimum amount of funds on hand. We target 6 months as being the minimum operating funds we would have on hand for the utility system. So we're well above that. We are in a very good position because the capital contribution fees come in. We get $2 or $3 million a year in capital contribution fees. Sometimes it's more. If you have a recession, it goes down. But that has been consistent over the years. And so the plan for replenishing is we're not going to replenish some in the near term because we've planned to spend down those funds for capital projects. That is the plan. And we will, by the end of the decade, have to go back and borrow money for capital projects. These large, the regional paralleling of force mains and gravity lines, as I've mentioned before to you all, those costs have skyrocketed in recent years. We're looking at ways to work with the engineers to stage those in phases So it goes into the future so that we do not have to put ourselves in the position of borrowing money until we absolutely have to. I mean, that's a natural part of doing large capital investments, borrowing funds for the long term. But we want to do that when it's necessary.
Thank you. A follow-up question to that, and I think you touched on this, is so we're spending approximately a third of the reserve funds by my calculation. So did you say there is a minimum that we need to keep in the reserve? And could you just highlight that one more time for me?
We try to keep 6 months, which is around, of operating expenses, which is around $8 million, something like that.
Okay. So if we're spending down $9 million, we would only have about a year's worth of operating remaining.
At June 30th, I think we had about $27 million. And then, you know, if we spend $9 million on capital contributions, we're at $19 million. And so that's an additional $8 or $9 million above any minimum that we would have to have. And that's not taking into account the fact that we collect money this fiscal year for capital contribution fees.
Understood. And has development had any impact on that? I mean, it seems like since I've been on council, there's been this hyper focus on development. Has there been any impact on what I would perceive as slower development since I've been on council? Has that impacted capital contribution fees, and how do you expect that would impact in years to come?
So we enter into contracts that are long-term contracts with developers, and they pay half up front, and then they pay as they build in increments of, minimum increments of 10, I believe it is. And so we had a bunch in the pipeline at any given time that we will collect revenue in the future on, cash in the future on. I can't say that we've seen a precipitous decline in demand for new capital contribution fees. Last year was a strong year. Kathy can talk a little bit about exactly what's happened year to date. But we have, especially for out-of-town sewer, that is the fastest growing area for us, west of the town of Lexington. And we continue to see the CCFs being purchased each year.
Understood. And one other follow-up question on finance, I guess, related. So in fiscal year 2024, the enterprise fund posted $13.2 million in net income. So keep that number in mind. In fiscal year 2026, that number is going to drop to $1.54 million, which is about an 88% drop. And to me, after hearing some of your presentation, some of that makes sense. But it signaled, is there a strain on the system? How do you interpret that number? Or is it just solely related to those capital projects?
So the fact that we've had increased cost, looking at the budget on a budgeted basis with the city of Casey, that's an important contributor. Even though we've had vacant positions, we budget for those positions because we want to fill those positions. So when you're looking at anticipated budgets, those impact what you see on a budgetary basis because they're still in there even if they're not filled. Mm-hmm. So there's not been a major change in the financial condition of this utility. We continue to perform very well, and we're in a tremendous position to be able to cash fund those projects. And I'm really thankful for that we've been able to delay borrowing money. Even though rates are going in the right direction now, hopefully, and by the time we get these large projects going, that general prices will be in better shape, the raw materials, maybe there'll be some less pressure on being able to provide contractors for building projects, and the engineers will have a little more capacity in the next 3 or 4 years. So hopefully these anticipated costs will moderate some over the coming years.
Okay, thank you. And then David, I have 2 questions for you. So I think they'll be relatively quick. So in the budget, capital equipment grew 125, capital equipment spending grew 125% year over year. I assume, and I emphasize the word assume, that this reflects deferred maintenance being called up. Do we have some sort of plan for how we're addressing that deferred maintenance? And is my assumption correct?
I would say yes. If you look at the one plan, the first bunch of items you see are actually electrical in nature. So these are things that had been overlooked for years, and the piper came calling. So you'll see that. We did our best to try and control that. For example, we deferred replacing 4 utility vehicles that are all over 100,000 miles until next budget year, just because we were trying to do our best to balance out. So we went through it. Some pumps that needed replacing, we deferred the cost of those too. So we tried to balance it. The things that are on there are things that had been deferred previously, consciously or subconsciously, and so that's why they're on that list.
Okay, and then my final question is and I don't have this on my list of questions, but this page, I would argue rightfully so, bothers me, the bad news page.
Yeah.
And I guess I'll just ask a very plain stated question. So sewer line cleaning, valve O&M program, regular cleaning of air release valves, flushing program, so much more, grease trap inspections. Those are things that we're not able to do, or we're not doing, I guess, 100%.
We're doing when we need to. So sewer line cleaning, for example, it's when somebody calls up and says, you know, I've got a clog, as opposed to we're getting out there with our SL rat and we're taking a look at our lines proactively, and we're doing it on a regular basis to help keep. So, yeah, and it bothers me too.
I guess my question is, I don't know how to ask it other than just plainly, is there something that you need from council to get these things done? I mean, other than it seems you need staff, but is there something that we can do to make that, getting these tasks done easier?
I'll pause on that. I think first I want to say thank you to all of you, because the changes made last year, that was the faith in getting that turned around. Now we need some time to actually get it going in the right direction. That's why I kind of put that blurb in there. One, right, if we're not doing things properly, you have to own it, and then you have to figure out how you're going to correct it. That's on the page because we're owning it. We made some changes to turn things around, go the right direction, and we're showing progress on that. But it's going to take time. Changing culture is one of the most difficult things to do. And I think one of the biggest, when you have the right people in place, then all of a sudden you start seeing, and I'll defer back, I look at finance, because the meter piece of that was huge, and we can't say in words how big that was to both departments and the amount of energy that put into it. And it, you know, it turns into a small little blurb on a sheet. But the amount, like, you know, below Kathy, they were just like, gosh, you know, the work you put in. And I'm not taking credit for that. That was, you know, people who have come in, have been hired into the town, who believe in the direction and have put a focus on that. So I say put a pause because I think we still have room to go, and we hit a point where we went rushing, and part of it I probably got a little overzealous, and I was like, we are going to hire, we're going to fill, and my staff came to me and they were like, we can't do it anymore. You have to pause on the hiring piece. And I was like, I guess we do. Once they're trained up and we can move them out and bring some new ones in, we're going to, you know, it's like a ball going downhill. It's going to get more speed. And I think where it's going to end up. But you never know. We might get to a point where we go, okay, we've accomplished this and we're this short. And then I'll come back and say we're this short. What's our goal or our plan in addressing that much of it? But I'm not going to ask for anything now until I know we're that close.
All right. I'll just wrap up by saying when I came to council, I think one thing that stuck with me is, I can't remember which one of you said it, that the town is really a small town that runs a large utility. And I don't think I ever realized that, much less that we service utility way outside of the town bounds. So I'll just echo Councilmember Carnes and say thank you. I think you've done a good job.
Madam Mayor, I have a quick question before David goes. Piggyback on Gavin, just in your opinion, the water and sewer is very important, obviously, to everyone. Maintenance-wise, do you feel like you're staying above water, or do you feel like you're treading? Do you feel like your maintenance, you have a plan that you feel like for years to come that you're going to be fine?
I'd say we're staying above water, which is why, you know, it's kind of a surprise when we talk about and you see those numbers. It's just not where we want to be. Do we have a plan? Yep, we definitely have a plan. And I would think we'd be there in the next year or two.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Madam Mayor, I have a couple of things I'd like to point out real quick.
Okay.
We want to say that the incentive programs that were adopted at the recommendation of Administrator Gleaton, that those have played a positive impact as well. The sign-on bonus that has helped David in recruiting. Very important. Rachel Gleaton didn't know she was an accountant too. She showed me a couple of things that specifically address some of the things that Gavin was asking about, so I'll mention those real quick. The columns that you're referring to, we're looking at 24 actual and 25 estimated actual. In that is large numbers, $6.5 million of developer contributions, meaning developer builds a neighborhood and turns over the assets to us. There's about $3.5 million in 25, I believe it is, that's estimated for that. And we also have state grants, state ARPA money being granted to us. That's also reflected in the actuals. So we don't budget for anticipated contributions from developers. And of course, the ARPA money is one-time money. So those contribute to some of the difference you noticed.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Madam Mayor,
Yes, sir.
Stuart, you kind of touched on one of the questions I'd written down. I'll be very brief. Sure. Related to this incentive program, I didn't hear anything about the referral side. So two-part question, have you noticed that all facets of that incentive program have been helpful? Because I know we had different tiers and different pieces of it, such as referral versus sign-on versus certifications and some of those things. And then secondly, what would you suggest we do with it? Maybe this is for David or it's for all three of you. Increase that program, increase a portion of it, abandon a portion of it. Like the resounding thing I heard, and piggybacking off of not reiterating some of the questions said thus far, my remainder is just to the manpower and the, you know, for the vacancy spots that you have are so high, and it'd be important, I think, to get in front of some of this stuff because, you know, they didn't build Rome in a day, and you certainly can't build a utility system overnight. So I think this is kind of like a police department getting ahead of gang activity. You want to be proactive instead of reactive. So what, David, do you see is most important as far as manpower and how we can help you there? And then secondarily, do you believe that there's something in your wish list we could do as far as being proactive instead of reactive?
So thank you for asking. So my gut is when we look at where we are, the big issue really is going to be, are we where we need to be pay grade wise? So one of the examples, if I use an in-house, is going to be meter techs coming in, what they do versus utility techs that have to be certified, have to have continuing education, all of that. And I don't have the numbers with me, which is why I was going to kick that can a little bit, because I haven't had time, honestly, to do a salary structure to see where we are in, but we're behind. And that's going to be the big thing. As far as the bonus, it helps, I think. The referral bonus, I think we had 2 throughout, so 2 out of 28. Hard to tell whether that's a driver or not. I know the 2 that got it were happy to do it. I have one employee who seems to be driven by that, and he's referred a couple people. One didn't make it long enough for him to collect on the second one. So, so that's kind of where the bonuses are, and that's where I think really we are with that. I think some of the positions are good, and some of them are not. Our starting is probably a little bit low. I think supervisor-wise, our assistants in that structure are probably a little bit low as well. So here again, I don't like necessarily coming and throwing that out to you unless I have the data. I'm a guy who likes to have the data behind me, so I was reluctant to address it, but that's kind of where I hinted at it, like to stay tuned. I want to come at you and say, hey, this is where the other places are, and this is where we are, and present something more concrete. But
That's fine. And as far as being proactive instead, or did you?
I would like to supplement a little bit of what David said. I know that definitely the referral bonus, I know, has been very popular with the police department. I know that's not what we're talking about tonight. The sign-on bonus is a huge piece for David. He didn't address that. I did just make a note to myself. So when we come back in April for the general fund workshop, I'll make sure to have the numbers for both sign-on bonus and referral bonus. It was in May last year, so we're just shy, 9 months, maybe 10 months for it to be in effect. I'd like to also point out David's been a little bit humble. A lot of what he's talked to you about tonight are entry-level folks, but what he doesn't tell you is that we've had 2, maybe 3 supervisor positions that he personally recruited for, and those folks are still in their role since the moment they hired. And so that's 2 to 3 referral bonuses that he doesn't get. He's not eligible for that, of course. Those individuals hired on were eligible for the sign-on bonuses, and 2 of them I can think of off the top of my head. That was one of the key drivers to be able to incentivize them to come. So I did just want to give some props to David for that, because when it comes to leadership, he's been able to put folks in place who have done a bang-up job.
That's great. Yeah, I think I'll speak for myself, but we certainly love the incentivizing through these one-time things rather than, long-term obligations. But obviously we want to do what's right.
We appreciate you a lot, especially with all you've had to deal with your extra too, meaning Loomis and Ripple. And
Madam
I
Mayor.
think Todd has some questions on Casey.
Yeah, maybe this is for Rachel or Stuart, or just trying to understand if we have any further insight than what we're getting on the paper here as far as Casey's O&M annual budget increases. I mean, the numbers certainly are significant, and I know at one point we're trying to get a better handle of that because we are kind of joined at the hip, and so as Casey goes, so we go. And so are there any further explanations of that? When I was looking at these increases, there's a dollar increase amount here, and I'm assuming with the dollar increase amount, I mean, is that based on flows, or is that a per gallon? Are we looking at a per gallon scenario based on how toxic it is, or are we talking about increased flows? And then I know, well, just tell me what you know, or if we've got any further insight than just things went really expensive in Casey.
So we did have extensive conversations with the city last year, and the information that we received is that the city is going to be investing in the sewer plant in terms of making sure that not only are they doing the reactive like we are talking about tonight and wanting to be as proactive as they can and making sure that the maintenance of the plant, that all of those things are done to a high standard, and that the costs that are being included in the budget are reflective of providing that high level of service. And we support that in principle. We were just asking for more information about, you know, the details. Now, we are significantly into this fiscal year, and so we've asked for budget to actual information from them. Proof is in the pudding, what actually is showing up. So we hope to get that, which will give us some more insight, or give us better insight to what's actually happening. Because as we told the city, you know, they're responsible for operating the plant under the contract at a level of service that is industry accepted. We don't want anything to happen that causes problems in the Congaree, and so we're supportive of that. But you as a council, we as staff, owe it to our citizens to understand the details, and that's what we have been asking more for. Now, won't go into depth, but you know, they've had some staffing issues during the year, dealing with some significant challenges, and we respect that. But we're here in the budget season, and I think, you know, it would be very helpful to us to be able to answer your question more fully, to get that information from them. I expect to get it.
And then just follow up, and then maybe we can go to the House. But it's I do just want to note for the record, and for anybody that might listen to this, Casey had a 25% increase in their water rates last year. I don't know what they're tracking towards this year, but historically we've had between 3 and 5% increases, and that's because people had the political courage and political will to do small incremental increases, as opposed to being politically expedient and foolish and doing no increases over time, and then 25% increase can really have dramatic impacts. And so I know that I certainly don't know their financials or anything along those lines. I just know there's always questions about why we have small incremental increases, but eventually the chickens do come home to roost, and you have to keep your ratios in line, or you can't run your system. And so I'm glad we actually did our small incrementals. I know we can't handle, you know, some of the increases that we're looking at coming down the line. So we'll look forward to hearing from you guys after you guys get more detail from them.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
David brought up to you about the analysis software and that program. I wonder if council would be open to us putting it into the capital budget for '26 with the anticipation of at least part of it being funded by a grant potentially. And if that doesn't materialize, we can come back to you and talk about it. But it would be nice to have that programmed into the budget so that we know that we can take that important step. But we wanted to talk to you about it, at least to some degree, before we put it out there and put it in the budget specifically. But just want to get some feedback from you, because we don't want to, if we can avoid it, come back and ask for things mid-year. This would be one way for us to avoid that potentiality.
Madam Mayor?
Yes. You gonna let anybody else talk tonight?
You normally ask me that.
Gavin, you're being quiet, honey, compared to him.
I think that's a great idea, but I wouldn't be interested in answering that question until I heard for sure about this potential 8.7% increase above the 3.5, because that could train wreck a lot of what we're doing if that actually comes to fruition.
So, Madam Mayor, I'd like to address that.
Okay.
We as a staff do not anticipate coming to ask for a substantial increase. If we felt like that was going to be absolutely necessary, we would have, but we believe we can manage it through this coming year. And I was letting you know because it could impact us when we get to fully staffed and having to go through the rate study. But I don't think you'll be hearing from us asking for additional rate increases for the coming fiscal year.
Madam Mayor?
He's going to be quiet now. We'll go ahead, Ron. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
How much do we think we need for that system? Do we have a rough number on that?
300,000. It's in there.
We don't have to vote.
Pardon me for just a moment.
Is that what you-
So the water system is about 300,000 to create.
Okay.
It's a
It's in there.
50,000 anticipated recurring annually for maintenance and keeping the system up to date and getting the input from the engineers on an ongoing basis. Sewer, which we would come back after the water, right now we're estimating about $600,000 for the initial investment. Now, I'll tell you this.
Your plan.
Those are big numbers, but when we went and we created a model with the engineers for the specific purpose of planning for the gravity system parallel lines and the force main parallel lines to Casey. We did that, and those are not inexpensive projects just to do that piece. This will be an upfront investment for something that we'll maintain, and it will, in many ways, help us to avoid future investments in every 3 to 5 years trying to update that kind of analysis. It will be done.
So roughly $1 million. And a minute ago, you said that we had 27 million in CCFs. We're taking out 9. That leaves 18. You wanted to hold about 6 months, which was about 8 million. So we have about $11 million there. Can we take the $1 million out of the CCFs and, to address Mr. Carnes's point, not have to deal with it in the rates?
So yes, it would be, we would anticipate that we would fund it through the capital improvements plan,
Okay.
which would be CCFs in particular. And so I can't sit here and say that it has no impact on rates, because at some point, rates help to pay for debt, they help pay for capital contribution fees, but in the near term, it wouldn't have a direct impact.
Is there one we would need to do? Is one more important than the other? I mean, to me, it seems like water and sewer is pretty hand in hand. I know why the sewer is going to be more expensive to do. We've got more sewer taps. But is there one that we would need more than the other for any reason?
So I'll let David address it, but it is prioritized for water first.
Okay.
Yeah, when we talked about splitting it to reduce the impact. Water would definitely be first. Our water system is a little bit out of balance. For example, if we can't fill up all of our tanks because they're not at the same hydraulic profile, you fill up all of our tanks, one of them's running out of the ground. We have low pressure zones, high pressure zones, so that would be the one we would want to do first. Plus you have impacts like we had with South Lake last year. We almost lost a tank, and then you have that, you can see which valves do I need to turn to isolate the system the quickest. They're just different things. I would definitely prioritize the water first because of that. It's not to say that wastewater is necessarily least important, but it's something you can get away with for just a little bit longer while we prioritize the other one.
Okay, thank you.
Again, David, I want to thank you for all you're doing, and I like the way that you want to have all your people that you already have up to speed and on the team before you bring yourself new people, because that means a lot, I think, to your staff. And I appreciate everything you're doing. You got some sharp staff, because I've been with them probably more than I would normally since we've been dealing with Lumos and Ripple. So I do appreciate everything you're doing. Kathy, Stuart, all of y'all, Rachel, we appreciate all of y'all and all the staff that's here tonight with us. And with that, we don't have to vote on this to go on the agenda, but we will. I will take a motion to end this work session.
So moved.
Councilman Carnes makes the motion.
Second.
Councilman Miles seconds it. And all those in favor, raise your right hand. We are adjourned.